So then we ask the question, well then, what is well-being?
I need to get that clear, right?
Definitions matter, even today. So for an unbeliever to account for objective morality without having to rely on God, to define a moral act as one that contributes to well-being and an immoral act as one that reduces it. So that's the definition. So whatever contributes to well-being is good, and whatever is an immoral act is what reduces well-being. So bad well-being, good well-being. Kind of easy to follow there. So Harris, Dr. Stokes is going to look at Harris's kind of idea of what it is with suspicion. So he says, well, we might ask Harris, what is exactly well-being? If there's a way to define it so that we'll have some precise guide to us, this might be asking a bit much, but Harris says that's reasonable enough. It seems to me that the concept of well-being is like the concept of physical health. It resists precise definition and yet is indispensable. In fact, the meaning of both terms seem likely to remain perpetually open to revision as we make progress in science.
Right.
So
he wants to say here that it's we don't that it's vague, right? It's not very precise in terms of what well-being is. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's going to hold that against Harris, right? Yeah, but it is a vague concept.
Yeah. Right? In the weights and measures department, you have the cooled 1 inch length ruler to measure all 1 inch rulers with. You have precise pounds. There's not going to be a well-being stick or flask or whatever that might be. So yes, he's not going to hold it. So when it comes to details, our definition of well-being will ultimately, though, depend on our worldview. That is, whatever we count as well-being will be influenced by what sort of things we value and what we think reality is like.
Yeah, so that is a really interesting and I think important concept.
Important.
Notice he says, a stub toe decreases my well-being, all things considered. A knee replacement will likely increase it, despite the obvious downside. Getting married could go either way, and what about going to church? So well-being is, there's a lot of wiggle room with regard to it, and it has to do with what he says here, our kind of our worldview. Mm-hmm. How he calls it theory laden, right? So it's how we view the world. So, for instance, going to church might add to well-being for some people and not for others, right? Which is, so we have to consider that.
Right. Or going back to the Donnie Brasco example, you have some lawmakers that don't want that type of behavior and view it as kind of an entrapment scenario, and so they don't allow police officers to take part in that, whereas others do. So which is the factor there that leads to well-being? Well, it ultimately comes down to what you view as, fair, or you have to kind of define your well-being and other moral examples in that one. But you're ultimately, once again, coming back to worldview.
Right, and our values, right? And our values. So our values help determine it. He calls this theory-laden well-being, right? Yeah. So it's our theory about the way things work will determine to a certain extent what we consider as well-being. Mm-hmm. Right.
So movie 300, very loosely based on the real thing. The Spartan people in that movie put out their children in the wilderness and said those who are Spartan enough will come back and survive. We call that child abuse today, and so in what sense are we to say, well, that was an immoral act? Well, that's kind of us looking back and saying that's immoral, but for them that was completely a moral. In fact, that was the highest moral thing because it determined leadership, it determined accountability within the society, it determined strength, it worked out the survival of the fittest type deal, or the luckiest, depending on how you view it. And so, again, ultimately it comes down to where are your values, and your values are rooted in your worldview, and you can't escape that. I was thinking too of economics. Economics. There's a branch that I subscribe to called Austrian economics, where what things are worth are determined subjectively through value dependent on the person. So you have the Buddhist who doesn't view material things as important. Well, that $1 million house to him is zero, but to someone who likes that house. It may even be worth $2 million. They might give more because it's
enhances
worth more.
their well-being.
Yeah. So again, it ultimately comes down to your values, and it's grounded in your worldview.
Yeah.